Good morning, afternoon, and evening to the over 800 policymakers, journalists, think tank scholars and executives, and public and private donors who have turned out in force for the 2021 Why Think Tanks Matter in Times of Crisis, and for the launch of the 2020 Global Go-To Think Tank Index Report, the 15th edition of the report. I want to thank all of the planning committee members, the chairs and panelists who have so generously given their time and out of their very busy schedules to be here today to share with you their ideas and proposals for how to deal with the multiple crises we face. Thank you all for joining us as we work to increase the profile, performance, and impacts in every region of the world. And as we celebrate what the president of the Middle East Research Institute in Erbil, Iraq described as International Think Tank Day. In times of crisis, it is essential that we intensify our national, regional, global efforts to engage policymakers and the public in a discussion about the value and importance of think tanks at a time of multiple crises, and in an era of political and digital disruption. It is even more critical that we provide constructive and compelling examples of how think tanks add value and are serving as a catalyst for both ideas and action. Today's forum is designed to celebrate the global community of think tanks and present the case for why think tanks matter. The program has 4 segments. Session 1 will focus on the challenges we will face in 2021 as a result of what I describe as a hydrodemic, and those issues that the expert panel members feel deserve our undivided attention and may not be connected directly to the pandemic. Session 2 will provide 20 think tanks that made a difference in 2020 with policies and programs that did, in fact, help save lives and livelihoods. Session 3, we will hear from 6 of the leading think tank executives who will share with us what think tanks can and should do to make think tanks smarter, better, faster, more agile, and digital so that they can survive and, more importantly, continue to serve in these turbulent and uncertain times. I've asked a think tank executive, a journalist, and a policymaker in session 4 to make some closing comments about what we need to do to move forward. I told each of the panelists that I organized these forums because I am confident that we must move beyond what divides us and cross political and physical boundaries to solve the problems we face. I went on to say that consensus may not be possible, but finding common ground, building coalitions, and strengthening alliances is possible if we can provide the catalyst for ideas and action. My hope is that today's program will make a compelling case for ideas, evidence, experts, and above all, in times of crises, decisive action. At the end of the program, the Global Go-To Think Tank Index will be released and will be sent to all the participants by email. In closing, let me be constructively provocative and suggest that the words think tank do us a disservice and don't capture the important and varied roles we play in the policymaking process. I know that is startling coming from me, but I am in the process of developing a more appropriate term that captures all the good and great things our organizations do, and I welcome your thoughts. In most of my career, I've been spent and have a bias in terms of think tanks, obviously, and I am bullish on them because I believe they can make a difference. I am also guided by the words of Margaret Mead, who said, "A few committed people can change the world." And I believe that each one of us in our institution, especially in the difficult times we face, forging partnerships and coming together like today, we can make a difference and we can change the world. Mondi, I turn it over to you and let the program begin.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this kickoff panel of this summit. My name is Manda Miyangwa, and I'm the director of the Africa program at the Wilson Center. And I welcome you to this first session of the forum focusing on policies and priorities for 2021 in a world disrupted and transformed. The objective of this kickoff session, as Jim mentioned, is to look beyond COVID-19 and to provide an action-oriented policy agenda for 2021 that will not only address the fallout from COVID-19, but also present other non-pandemic policy priorities that require our attention in 2021 and beyond. And we have a fantastic panel that has been assembled to speak to us to these issues. They bring a wealth of experience and expertise to the discussion. They come from different countries and are professionals in different sectors. So without taking too much of their time, I will introduce each of our speakers this morning as they speak. You can find their bios in the program that has been provided to you. So I will just give a quick introduction of each of our speakers. They will speak for about 4 minutes each, and then we will take questions at the end, or I'll pose questions to them at the end if we have time. So with that in mind, it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ashish Jha, who's Dean of the School of Public Health at Brown University. Dr. Jha, your 4 minutes start now, sir.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I was asked to kick us off to talk about the state of the pandemic and what are the major lessons, and to do it in 4 minutes. So we've had about 100 million people in the world infected with this virus. That's the official toll. I think most of us believe that the true toll is probably about 10 times that. And so the true number of people who've been infected with COVID-19 or with SARS-CoV-2 is probably closer to 1 billion. Still leaves a vast majority of the world susceptible to this pandemic. At least 2 million people have died, though of course that is also a gross underestimate, and many, many more have died. One of the questions, if you look across the globe, is you see large variations in how different countries have done. Countries like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, New Zealand, Australia have done fabulously well. Countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Germany's actually done pretty well, but France, Spain have done much less well. It's really not so straightforward to be able to look at the picture of the global pandemic and make come up with easy explanations for why some countries have done well and some have done poorly. It certainly does not fall along national income lines. It does not fall along the health system, the capacity of the health system. In fact, many of us had assumed going into this pandemic, that countries with strong health systems like the US, like the UK, would do much, much better than countries with weaker health systems like India or Vietnam. Turns out we were largely wrong. So why were we so wrong? We were wrong because I overemphasized technical capacity of health systems, but did not adequately emphasize important issues such as governance, leadership, social cohesion, a set of factors that have actually sidetracked many, many high-income countries to suffer. So moving on from the state of the pandemic, let's talk a little bit about how the pandemic comes to a close, what the lessons are from that. The number one way we're going to get this pandemic under control is through vaccinations. And vaccines are a really important window into the state of the world we're in, because on one hand, there has been an incredible scientific enterprise to produce multiple vaccines in less than a year. This is unprecedented by human standards. And yet, what we are seeing now is the next phase of the challenge, which is how to get vaccines into people's arms. And where this is leading to what is, I think, one of the more troubling and challenging problems in front of us, which is vaccine nationalism, which is the fact that a vast majority of the vaccines in the world have been bought up by a small number of high-income countries. We have efforts from organizations like WHO and Gavi to do something called COVAX, which would be to get vaccines out to the rest of the world, and real concerns about whether we're going to be able to muster the political will to have a global approach to vaccinations. And we can get into in the Q&A the real problems if we don't and if we leave vaccine nationalism to move forward. The last point I want to finish with really is the issue of multilateralism across the whole pandemic, not just in vaccines. So if you look at the United States' approach to multilateralism, and again, I'm really focused on the pandemic, what the United States government did under Donald Trump was really amateurish. It walked away from WHO because of its frustrations around the way WHO initially handled China. Obviously, the Biden administration has signaled that they need to go back to WHO, and I think that's critical. But to me, it is no longer just an option to pick up the mantle of where President Obama left globalism and multilateralism. The Biden administration actually has to do much, much more and has to do much better. One of the things that the pandemic has shown us is the rise of regional organizations, regional entities, the most prominent of which is the Africa CDC. The Africa CDC was created really out of the challenges of the Ebola outbreak of West Africa, and it has performed admirably, and even that I feel like is an understatement. It's done an extraordinary job. Multilateralism through international organizations like WHO are important. Engaging in regional efforts is much more. So I know I'm at time, let me finish up by saying, as we think about getting through the rest of this pandemic and future ones, it's important to invest in biomedical and public health issues. It's also going to be really important to think about issues around governance and leadership to build systems that are resilient for future pandemics. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very insightful remarks there. Next up, we have Mr. Kevin Rudd, who is the former Prime Minister of Australia and current President of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Kevin, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to Jim and the team at University of Pennsylvania for pulling us together to celebrate think tanks, to reinvent them, and to have them contribute constructively to the public policy challenges of the world of 2021. Building on the comments just made by Ashish, he spoke about looking at the global pandemic through the lens of successful or failed governance. And that's where I'd like to add my 3.5 minutes in this discussion. And 3 ideas about how we deal with the big challenges of governance facing the world today, whether it's in global pandemic management, climate change, or frankly, the continued risk and growing risk of armed conflict between great powers. These are questions of global governance and the effectiveness thereof. Firstly, the granddaddy of them all, future of US-China relations. You might think this is a specialist topic, but the bottom line is it now impacts everything we do. Mention was just made of how it's impacted work with the WHO on global collaboration on the pandemic, but it's right across the field. Global economy, global security, climate action, technology, the rest. So therefore, think tanks need to work their way into the granularity of a new model for managing strategic competition between the US and China. I call it managed strategic competition, which provides scope for no-go areas, which are the core interests of each of the great powers, China and the United States. Secondly, it goes to areas of defined strategic competition, like in technology, like in trade, like in foreign policy, the battle for ideas. But thirdly, has within it a framework which enables continued collaboration in areas like climate and global pandemic management and treating vaccines as a global public good, as well as, for example, global debt management. In other words, things which are systemically critical for the world at large and for the planet as well. Second proposal is along these lines. The existing institution for global economic governance is the G20, formed more than a decade ago at the height of the global financial crisis. I'm one of its co-creators. So I have an interest in how it's gone in the last decade. And the answer is not all that well since we managed the last crisis effectively. It hasn't risen to its potential in this crisis. And so what therefore needs to happen under the Biden administration is, and we as think tanks can contribute to this, is how to renew the effectiveness of this institution which brings together governments representing 90% of the world's economies, 80% of global trade, and 66%, nearly 70% of the world's population. Because it becomes the clearinghouse for dealing with each and every one of the specialist issues which we are concerned about as the global confraternity, if you like, of think tanks. And that means recommendations about how the G20 has an effective long-term secretariat to drive its future action. Third and final point is on multilateralism, and that is the UN multilateral system and the Bretton Woods institutions have been slowly grinding into the dust. And that is prior to the impact of the Trump administration and the impact of Conan the Barbarian, otherwise called Donald Trump, on the multilateral system at large. And so therefore, the middle powers of the world, countries like France, Germany, like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, India, in other words, not the great powers, the middle powers from developed and developing countries, Mexico, others, need to form a critical mass of states dedicated to one thing, the revitalization of the machinery of multilateral governance, because the great powers won't do it. We have a vested interest in it happening, and that's where think tanks have a way of advancing this cause through what I've called a middle power 7, an M7, or what President Biden may call a D10. There are my three proposals for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm seeing a thread emerge already on the multilateralism issue, and that's a really, really important point that should have resonance right around the world. So our next speaker will be Ambassador Ricardo Ernesto Laguario, who is Secretary General of the Argentine Council for International Relations and the former Argentine ambassador to Russia. Over to you, Mr. Ambassador. Your 4 minutes start now, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So let's try to be brief in 4 minutes. The world is going through a reckoning. To quote Dean Acheson, we are once again present at the creation. And thus, we need a compass heading. To design this roadmap, I'm going to resort to Isaiah's Berlin interpretation of the Greek poet Archilochus, in the sense that we must be both a hedgehog and a fox. My hedgehog, one big thing is we the people, the opening words of the UN Charter, and my fox knows many things are multilateral culture, cooperation and collaboration, diplomacy, and demilitarization of political responses. All of them, of course, with the underpinning of a technological ecosystem. Let's start with the hedgehog. It's a fierce coincidence that last year, when we were commemorating the 75th anniversary of the creation of the UN, the first truly global crisis emerged. It was a we the people crisis oriented. This is why almost half of the world population had to lock itself at home, transformed into sanitary shelters. By the way, we never remotely resort to nuclear bunker like this in the past. Beyond the impact of the nature of the pandemic, the crisis strips the limits of the current international scaffolding to foresee, address, and give concrete solutions to problems that affect we the people, issues that most likely will be recurring in the future. The international governance system decision-making process remains centered around the nation state. That's correct. However, it is necessary to involve non-state actors and to encourage and promote a with the people-centered approach likewise. And a brief prescription regarding this, I would suggest a more common use of the ARIA formula mechanism at the Security Council. Now going to my focus. Multilateralism is a convention which must be carefully constructed and agreed upon in order to be sustainable over time. Nowadays, multilateralism cannot be limited to the systemic and state level. Civil society, academia, non-governmental organizations, the media, and think tanks must be part of a renewed constituency of multilateralism. You do not cheer multilateralism, you practice multilateralism. Multilateralism is not just about institutions, it is about culture. A sustainable multilateralism will not be such unless it has a solid foundation and it is perceived as effective and efficient by its main constituency, we the people. This new cultural underpinning must include and address the issues that affect we the people and not just those of the states. And some prescriptions regarding this strengthen the overall UN system, in particularly the soft power-oriented agencies such as WHO, UNICEF, UNESCO, FAO. Pay more attention to social dynamics, particularly the weak and youth. In addressing global issues, give more relevance to the multilateral approach. Demilitarize diplomacy and further negotiation and dialogue as well. This is the essence of cooperation and collaboration. And in facing these challenges and advancing in helping to overcome the low tide of multilateralism, think tanks should play a leading role. So I want to conclude by advancing a plaidoyer for we the people and to suggest that think tanks work together in drafting a manifest on multilateralism. I know this might sound naive, but I prefer utopia to dystopia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think a number of issues that you raised that already link into what our two previous speakers have addressed. I think several points stick out, including the one about the international infrastructure to address COVID has been found to be wanting. And so, that feeds again into this multilateralism. What can we do to be able to address both COVID and other future challenges that will face the world? So thank you so much for your remarks. Let me now turn it over to our next speaker, Mr. Jacob Schlesinger, who's a senior correspondent at the Wall Street Journal. Jake, over to you.
Thank you, Mondi. It's an honor to join such a distinguished group and to address such a distinguished audience. I realize I'm stating the obvious, so my topic is the economy, and I think that you need to start any discussion of this by noting that the single most important thing we can do to restore healthy growth in the US and the world is to end the health crisis. The core economic problem is a supply shock driven by necessary shutdowns and knock-on disruptions, such as school closings, that make it harder for millions of working parents to do their jobs. So better, faster vaccinations, testing, and cleaning are the most important economic policies of the moment. Beyond that, we need to look at some of the big issues and themes that the pandemic has exposed, exacerbated, or caused. There are probably about a dozen we should be talking about, but in my limited time today, I would like to roll briefly through 4 of them. First, this is the second major shock to traumatize the global economy in just over a decade, following the 2008-2009 financial crisis. While each crisis has obviously had very different roots, combined, they should raise broader concerns about the fragility and instability of the underlying system. There are reasons to think that the 21st century economy has tilted too far toward efficiency and away from resiliency. The financial system was oriented toward ever more risk in search of ever higher rewards, with thin or non-existent buffers to protect against losses. Manufacturing supply chains squeezed out costs and redundancies, and that exacerbated problems getting protective equipment and medication needed to respond to the pandemic. Many business gurus now advocate a shift in orientation from just-in-time to what they're calling just-in-case. The urgency of creating a more resilient system is raised if you believe, as many do, that more disruptive crises lie ahead, whether from another pandemic, a climate event, or something else. A second big theme of the pandemic has exposed, and here I'm echoing comments that Dr. Jha made earlier, this is in the US and elsewhere, which is the erosion of basic government competence and authority, and the incredible costs related to that. What we've seen over the past few decades is a steady defunding of government functions and an ideological attack on the role of government. Both have contributed to a steady decline in trust in the federal government, which in turn has made it harder for agencies to get funds, hire and retain qualified staff, and persuade citizens to follow their directives. Those problems have hampered the response to the pandemic, whether it's getting unemployment insurance payments to those who need it, or distributing the vaccine needed to end the virus. Many of those who want the vaccine can't get it due to bungled distribution plans. Many who should get the vaccine won't do so because they don't trust the government rollout. The pandemic has magnified another longstanding concern in the US and globally, inequality. Those like us who can do our work at home are largely fine. Those who have to go to work in person are mainly lower-income households and are forced to make a choice between health and work. Sectors heavily skewed toward lower-paid workers, such as restaurants, have been the hardest hit. The 10% or so of Americans who own most of the country's financial assets have thrived and gotten significantly more affluent during the pandemic. The widening inequality within countries is mirrored by a growing inequality between countries. Now, one way to address that issue, and the others I've raised, could be a significant increase in government expenditures. But that leads to my fourth and final big theme, which is the rapid expansion of government debt. Just a little while ago this morning, the International Monetary Fund released its latest fiscal monitor report and said that global public debt as a share of gross domestic product hit a whopping 98% in 2020, meaning government debt is roughly equal to the size of the whole world economy. There's a huge debate right now in the US and elsewhere over how much to worry about government debt at the moment, especially with interest rates at historically low levels and forecast to stay that way for years to come. How this debt tsunami plays out in markets and how policymakers choose to deal with it may be the biggest issue framing the post-pandemic world economy domestically and globally. Thank you very much, and now, Mondi, back over to you.
Thank you, Jake. Really, really good and powerful points there, and I see how all of these actually impact nearly all the countries around the world. I appreciated your point about moving the global economy from efficiency to resiliency and how we do that. Your point about the erosion of governance authority, so the delimitation and degrading of the state, and the looming debt crisis, and what that means, that all of these are big picture issues that we need to be looking out for. So really a breadth of issues have already been raised. I hope we have some time to touch on them at the end. Last but certainly not the least, let me now introduce Dr. Aditi Kumar, who's the Executive Director of the Belfer Center at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Aditi, over to you. Bring us home.
Thank you, Mondi. And I'm very pleased to be part of such a distinguished panel. So thank you for inviting me to Jim and Emma Harris and the whole team of people that are working behind the scenes to make this conference happen. Thank you to all of you. So I have the topic of technology, and I wanted to talk about the geopolitics of technology to extend some of these same themes around the economy and multilateralism. So I think of three drivers of the geopolitics of technology. The first is obviously national security concerns. So who is in charge of critical networks and information flows in our modernizing economy? Are they able to weaponize it? Are they able to, in the words of Bob Blackwell and his co-author Jennifer Harris, wage war by other means? And how is U.S. primacy in this area specifically being challenged by China? The second similar concern is economic strength So who is capturing the profits from the rapidly evolving tech industry, and what does that imply for jobs, taxes, for the United States, China, and our other main competitors? And what is sort of the talent pool that we're building that is contributing to the virtuous cycle then of maintaining our economic strength? Lastly, I think it's about values and principles. So who is dictating the values that are embedded in emerging tech? Who is involved in setting global standards for this tech? And so I think the geopolitics of technology will be one of the most important competitive battlefields that we'll see play out in the next 5 to 10 years. And obviously the players here are the US and China first and foremost. There are various sectors in which we will see all of this play out. The ones I think we've talked about a lot already are artificial intelligence and 5G. Others that I would look out for are biotechnology, semiconductors, social media, digital finance, batteries, and space. And while I will not go through all of them in my 2 minutes or so, I'll just give a couple of examples. So in the digital finance space, we can look specifically at the example of digital currencies. China is now on its 4th major pilot of a central bank issued digital currency. Couple that with their thriving payments sector, and they are on the path to achieve ubiquitous domestic use of this digital currency by the Olympic Games in Beijing in 2022. And when you think about the vast network, the financial network they're building, and if they decide to go cross-border with that network, that presents immense challenges to U.S. dominance of the financial network as we know it today, and consequently our ability to sanction, our ability to track illicit financial activity, and maintain sort of our role as a system operator. A similar example I think we're all seeing play out is on social media. I, as part of my research, and for no other reason, downloaded TikTok about 2 months ago and lost 2 weeks of my life that I will never get back. It is a fantastic product coming out of China, and belies the fact that, they have, Chinese companies have this vast tech-savvy domestic population on which they're developing these amazing algorithms, and then the result is you get these very addictive platforms like TikTok. And the US government is obviously struggling to figure out what our response to this should be. Are we going to ban it? Are we going to force residential donors to buy it? How are we going to deal with this threat of social media platforms that influences the data privacy concerns, the very legitimate concerns about censorship that they then introduce into our society? And finally, on semiconductors, I think a lot of people have spoken about this. The national security concerns have become clear, especially when you look at the 5G sector and what is happening with Huawei. But there is a trade-off here between our national security concerns and our economic concerns. U.S. firms are at the helm of large parts of the value chain for semiconductors, and so when we do decide to leverage export controls, that does present a trade-off to our manufacturers and designers who are involved in the semiconductor value chain that we have to then figure out. So I'll just end with some considerations, for policymakers. I mean, there are the basics of maintaining your competitive edge, which is, maintain your talent pool, don't shoot yourself in the foot by having overly restrictive immigration policies that keep talent out, invest in STEM education, etc. I think multilateralism is a huge part of this. We can't go at it alone. If we're going to use export controls, if we're going to use sanctions to keep our edge, then we better do it in a coordinated way. And finally, the question I have is defense enough? Is it okay that we keep blocking and tackling companies through investment screenings and other measures, or do we need to have more of an offensive policy? So I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Aditi. I think a lot of really good points on looking at that tech space as well. A number of issues that I thought you raised that are going to be important for us to think about. I think we see that tech is going to play an increasingly important role in the economies, national security across the world. who wields the power, who is shaping the agenda. All of those are questions we need to be thinking about. And, who is developing or who is the driver behind the values and principles that are driving action in this space. Digitization of economies and some of the positives and not so positive stuff that's coming out of that. How we manage the dark web issues in terms of governance, and then balancing national security and economic security. So a lot of really, really good questions around the board. Thank you so much to all of our panel here. We have exactly 1 minute left before our panel concludes. So what I'm going to do, since I don't have questions, is give you each 30 seconds. If you were to, if you were sitting before a panel of key leaders and you had one piece of advice in terms of what they do in 2021 to help us move in the right direction, overcome this crisis, be ready for the next one, what would that one piece of advice be? I'll start with you, Kevin. I'll just go in the order in which I'm seeing you on the screen here. Just 30 seconds.
Having been a national political leader, my one word of advice to other national political leaders is, in any given 24-hour period, carve yourself out 1 hour to think. Not to respond, not to react, but to think. This may seem very simple to think tankers. It's not when you're in the hurly-burly of responding to those who really run the world, which are the world's media proprietors.
Thank you. Let me go to you, Ambassador Laguario. 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go. Thank you. I'm going to go to my hedgehog big idea. Please listen to we the people. Pay more attention to what we are seeing each and every day on the streets and beware of that. International relations, it's not just about states. It's going to be more and more about we the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Aditi, over to you.
I would say we need to pay attention to inequality and the disparate impacts of all of these crises, economic, health, etc., to really pay attention to how they're impacting different people differently, because I think that then contributes to, as Ambassador Laguario just pointed out, a lot of other political and civil unrest. So I would really pay.
You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
You're fine. I think everybody else got muted. Monday's muted.
Sorry. Jake.
Jake, you're muted.
All right. Ashish, do you want to go?
Sure. Let me go. So this pandemic, the biggest health crisis, arguably the biggest crisis of a century, is not going to come to an end unless we can get most of the world vaccinated. I would love to see a concerted global effort on vaccinations as a way to show the world when we are facing difficult problems, countries and organizations know how to work together.
Sorry, Jake, can you hear us now? Why don't you close us off and then we will.
Sure. Just very briefly, because I know we're at time. Look, just to echo again what Dr. Jha said, there's a lot of crises we need to deal with, and we can't lose sight of them, but nothing can get solved until we get the economy past the pandemic and end the pandemic. So that's the first and most urgent task.
You all did a fantastic job with your remarks, did a fantastic job concluding and summarizing, so I don't have to do it. You spoke very powerfully to the key actions that need to be made. So thank you so much to all of you, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Jim, over to you.
Jim, you're muted.
Thank you all. An extraordinary session on which achieved what I hoped it would, to give a overview of both the impact of the pandemic, but also what we need to focus on in 2021. Extraordinary thanks to all of you. Mihir, I hand it off to you, and we now have presentations on 20 institutions that have made a difference in 2020 to show concretely why think tanks matter. Samir?
Thank you, Jim, and congratulations for the International Think Tank Day, an important day for all of us. I think we'll very quickly move to this important segment, why think tanks matter in times of crisis. We will hear of efforts of think tanks from around the world that have led to tangible progress and change in their respective geographies and beyond. To kick this off, let me first invite my dear friend and doctor and the head of the United Emirates Policy Center, Professor Ibtisam Al-Kadhi. Can I request you to speak, ma'am? You have 2 minutes. Let me warn you that Jim will drop the time bomb on you if you exceed your limit. So 2 minutes to everyone. Professor, over to you.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Jim. It's an honor to be with you. EPC has provided the UAE decision makers with a strategy to confront COVID-19 pandemic challenges by recommending an actionable plan containing key policies and alternatives on various interconnected issues. Because of the time, I will just be brief. First, on strengthening containment measures. Second, in using modern technology in enhancing the system development and capacity building. Fourth, regional and international cooperation. And the last one, we made several recommendations to make full use of all bilateral and multilateral mechanisms to enhance communication and cooperation to improve coordination of epidemic control efforts through regional and international cooperation, and that was very successful with UAE and been ranked one in UAE in terms of advising decision makers in this issue. And I hand it to you, Samir. I didn't want to go in the recommendation.
Thank you, Ibtisam. Let me now invite Maria del Carmen Achina, Vice President, National Economic Research Center, Guatemala, for your 2 minutes, ma'am. You'll have to unmute yourself and then speak. Yeah.
In the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity, said Albert Einstein. The National Economic Research Center, CIEN, is a think tank that for the past 3 decades has focused on promoting public policy to improve the development of Guatemala. The year 2020 presented a particular challenge because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The emergency hit the economy and health sectors heavily in a country with less than 1 hospital bed for each 1,000 inhabitants. Therefore, in order to help understand the pandemic, CIEN elaborated and published 3 documents in public virtual events. The first one included research on the responses of results of other countries. The second one was an analysis of the measures adopted in Guatemala. And the third one, we formulated short, medium, and long-term responses for Guatemala. The Vice President of the country participated in this last event. During the second semester, CIEN concentrated in 2 projects with the aim to save lives and livelihoods. The first one was an observatory to monitor the decision and improvements of the COVID-19 programs. And the second one was to seize the opportunity to promote the modernization and digitalization of the government. We worked close with the Presidential Commission incorporated in a plan for digital government in Guatemala. Moreover, CIEN signed a letter of agreement with the Commission so that this year the team will participate in designing specific programs within the roadmap of the digital agenda of the current government. This is an ongoing effort of active involvement in public policy planning. I want to finish with a quote of Ellen Glasgow. What happens is not as important as how you react to what happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Can I now request Osama Al-Gohari, Director, Information and Decision Support Center, Egypt, for his intervention.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to address such a distinguished group and audience. IDSC initiated 3 mega projects to assist the government in combating the effects of the pandemic. The first project was the launching of care.gov.eg, a website to support the Egyptian healthcare system. CARE provides Egyptian citizens with infographics and short informative videos to ensure that credible information is delivered to end users in a friendly, easy, and interactive way. The website was chosen by Google and Facebook to be the most reliable source of information. In addition, the Egyptian cabinet promoted CARE as the one and only source of accurate and credible information for the country. The second project was the launch of Ahalina, our people website, the slogan for which is helping people hand in hand, that emerged as the government technological tools to contribute securing adequate income for all affected workers during the pandemic and preserving their jobs. The website collected donations worth around $21 million from multiple entities. Its initial target was only $6 million. This initiative contributed to the success of the Egyptian government efforts to disperse a grant of 500 Egyptian pounds for irregular employment, which met the needs of approximately 2 million families for cash support. The third one and the last one was the launching of a series of publications concerning the coronavirus outbreak, including 250 proposed initiatives to reopen safe economic activity during the outbreak. Thank you.
Well done, Osama. Can I now request Mohammed Al-Agati, Director, Arab Forum for Alternatives, Lebanon, to speak to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the organizers. The Arab Forum for Alternative is working regionally, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have issued several studies about it. One about the related the pandemic with the inequality in our region, one with the democracy, and the third was analyzing the public policy system and to be able to achieve protection for all. I will talk about this study because it's analyzed the public policies addressing COVID-19 in 3 countries in the MENA region, Tunisia, Egypt, and Lebanon, on 2 levels. One was a technical level related to the process, and the other was from a socio-economic perspective, analyzing the outcomes of these policies. We identified 7 gaps in the 3 countries. Main ones are fragility of the state institution, particularly in the health services, especially with austerity conditionalities imposed on these countries, the very high level of centralization, the limited role of parliament in facing the pandemic in the 3 countries, and lack of proper utilization of resources of the private sector in the public policies response. The study proposed around 10 general recommendations. I will mention from them the need of a better management of resources, which requires adopting a different approach in the policy-making process. The revival of several industries during the pandemic was an example for unused resources that need to concentrate with it and try to revive it to be able to face crisis in the future. The need of a democratic and participatory manner that guarantee contribution of the citizens in the policy-making process, and the partnership between different stakeholders like civil society and municipalities.
Thank you, Mohammed. We'll have to interrupt
yes,
you. Apologize.
10 seconds.
Thank you. We'll have to move to Milena Lazarevic, Program Director, European Policy Center, Serbia. Milena, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Jim. Immediately after the introduction of the lockdown in Serbia in March 2020, we at CEP Belgrade gathered a group of renowned economists from our network of associates to develop an evidence-based proposal to fight off the anticipated immense impact of the pandemic on the economy, especially on Serbia's very fragile small and medium enterprise sector. They swiftly developed a proposal containing 10 key horizontal policy measures. Seeing that the public debt of the country at the time allowed for additional borrowing, we proposed horizontal measures targeting all active private companies, which included temporary suspension of payment of certain types of taxes, temporary suspension of loans and lease payments, advanced corporate taxes for all business entities. For example, refunding the fiscal part of fuel costs for freight transport companies, provision by the National Bank of Serbia of a credit line for additional bank liquidity of up to 2 billion euros without interest. We also proposed, in addition to these horizontal measures, that the government should provide special support to those industries and sectors that were being significantly impacted by the crisis in the long run, especially the tourism industry and the agriculture sector, parts of the agricultural sector linked to tourism. Our proposal also insisted that the support measures should be kept as simple as possible and should be easily implementable, meaning without too much bureaucracy, thus ensuring swift response and avoiding collapse of the economy. Almost all of these proposals were taken into account by the government of Serbia and were put in place as early as April 2020, and the support to the vulnerable industries already in summer 2020. We put in place a very robust public advocacy campaign and received primetime national television coverage. And for the end, I just want to say that it is not so difficult for think tanks to create impact when governments want to listen. On economy, they were all ears. But I have to admit that on rule of law, governance issues, and problems, we have not had an equal impact, and this remains a struggle and a challenge for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Melina. We'll move to Melissa Leech, Director, Institute of Development Studies, United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. Well, as top international development think tank, IDS has been producing and mobilizing research on many aspects of the pandemic globally and its implications for inequality and sustainability and transformation. The particular program I'm highlighting today is the Social Science and Humanitarian Action Platform, SHAP, which has been operationalizing knowledge from networks of social scientists internationally to ensure that emergency preparedness and response are sensitive, adaptive, contextually informed, community engaged, and therefore effective. What we've done is to develop an agile real-time platform model involving on-demand but substantive rapid response briefings with visual explainers, along with evidence reviews and webinars. And with this, SHAP's been able to balance responders' needs for really quick guidance with the importance of deep, locally led, context-driven social knowledge. So what we've done with COVID is to collaborate with international agencies, including WHO, UNICEF, IFRC, UN Habitat, and donors, including USAID and the UK FCDO, as well as national organisations. The top 10 briefings have been downloaded nearly 30,000 times. 3 key areas of policy impact include, first, raising attention to the stark issues of COVID control in informal urban settlements, where we fed directly into the UN Interagency Standing Committee guidelines. Secondly, informing WHO global strategies on home care for COVID. And thirdly, producing guidance on addressing online COVID information, dis and misinformation, especially recently around vaccines, highlighting here the importance of trust and dialogue with communities. As the pandemic and its aftermath continue to unfold, SHAP continues to engage with many international partners, both responding to direct requests, contributing to global strategies, and advocating for the importance of social science inputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your important work. Marlos Lima, Director for International Affairs, FGB Brazil. Marlos, over to you.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Emma. Well, like many other countries, Brazil created a number of mechanisms to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 on its economy, and especially on its low-income citizens' livelihood. Well, FGB had an important role in the creation and also in the implementation of a number of policies. I would like to shine a light on just one of them, Brazil's Emergency Income Program, a cash transfer policy that targeted our most vulnerable individuals and reached almost 70 million people. To implement the program, Brazil had to overcome a number of technical problems, and one issue was how to identify who was eligible for assistance. This, of course, was a big problem. And please keep in mind that of Brazil's 200 million population, 100 million are workers, and nearly 40% are estimated to work informally. They are outside of any official labor control system. They are also called invisibles. How did we solve this problem? Well, FTV, alongside the Brazil government, used artificial intelligence techniques to create systems that could identify and pay all eligible individuals, include those who would otherwise remain in the shadows. We, FTV, believe that by assisting in these efforts, we are making a major contribution in the mitigation of pandemics, socioeconomic effects, and in the fight against poverty in Brazil. Thank you very much, Samir.
Thank you very much, Marlos. May I request Paolo Magri, Executive Vice President, Italy, for his remarks in his 2 minutes.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you very much. At ISPI, we did what most of you did. We immediately mobilized our network of experts to understand and respond to the crisis, as mentioned in the background paper. Am I proud of this? No. We did what we are supposed to do, what all think tanks did. Is there anything I can be somehow proud of? Yes. Something with no practical impact, but a lot of symbolic significance. At the time in which Italy and Milano, my country, my city, were the first heavily affected areas out of China. At the time in which, like many others in the months to follow, we were overwhelmed by practical problems, how to work remotely, how to redesign programs. And we were overwhelmed by emotion, with friends being hospitalized or dead, such a war bulletin. At that time, from the epicenter, we launched the Think Tank React Solidarity Campaign. In dark times, think tanks keep their lights on, which brought together in a few days around 150 leaders worldwide. You. Why am I proud of a solidarity campaign? Did it change the world? Certainly not. But I believe we underlined the key values for our community, often stressed by Jim McGann. First, the need to react quickly and promptly, even facing the unpredictable, even in dark times. So many governments did not, with the consequences we all know. Second, the need to act together, to bring the band together. So many countries did not, so many countries are not, with the consequences we all see. Third, the need to manage also by magic, not only numbers and technical notes, but also simple and emotional messages. And last but not the least, dear friends, the need to keep in mind that we are not only institute, but primarily human beings who fear dark time and are relieved by sharing light and hope. Grazie.
Thank you, Paolo. Let me invite Zamanzima Maziboku from the Mapungwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, South Africa. I hope I did not murder the name. Over to you for your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Samir. So in 2019, the Mapungwe Institute launched an edited volume called The Epidemics and the Health of African Nations to address Africa's experience of epidemics. The research findings in the book have taken on even more importance as Africa contends with COVID-19, and the need grows for quality, evidence-based information about how best to address a pandemic on the continent. Using the findings from the volume, MISTRA has been leading the conversation on South Africa's health system preparedness to manage COVID-19. The research findings on the role of community healthcare workers and the syndemic approach in managing epidemics were revealing of the important contribution by community healthcare workers in screening and educating communities about diseases, like with HIV in South Africa, and tracing active cases and contacts seen in the successful containment of Ebola in Nigeria, as well as the interrelationship between disease and political and socio-economic factors found on the African continent. The publication also interrogates other issues like financing of healthcare in the form of a national health insurance and regulatory frameworks for commercialization and distribution of emerging health technologies, which are currently relevant in how the COVID-19 pandemic is unfolding. The research paved the way towards commissioned research to interrogate the interventions that have been put in place by the government for managing the pandemic and to put forward recommendations for how various key players can ensure the COVID-19 strategy by the government and several businesses is multi-sectorial and multifaceted. The research featured on numerous media engagements with MISRA officials appearing on several media platforms throughout the South African lockdown. It also received a review in the South African Medical Journal, and this included an invitation to be part of the Gauteng Premier's COVID-19 Advisory Committee, which provides advisory on how the Gauteng province, where MISRA is based, can best navigate the pandemic. Other MISRA researchers have also written opinion pieces
Time is elapsed.
and hosted webinars on challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for interrupting you. Let me move to Luis Fernando Mejia, Executive Director, Federação Colombia. I hope I got that right. Sorry, Luis.
Yes, thank you very much, Samir. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jim, for organizing this. Well, Federação provided the first estimates of both health and economic costs of COVID-19 in Colombia in April 2020, which were determined to be around 13 to 17 billion per month of strict lockdown. Aligned with those results, our economic growth forecast was set around -2% to -7.5%, which led to sharp revisions of growth forecasts by the government market analysts. The Desarrollo also contributed with the estimate of the pandemic, regional and sectoral level, which served as an input for reactivation plans in different cities of the country. We also provided a roadmap of the measures to cope with the effects of the pandemic, most of them adopted by the national government. Among the measures recommended for the short and medium term were first, social transfers to poor and vulnerable households, second, wage subsidies for firms, particularly for small and micro enterprises, and third, infrastructure investment, especially in small projects like the tertiary road. Regarding long-term recommendations, the Desarrollo drew the attention over the importance of structural reforms to obtain higher economic growth. These reforms include a tax reform, which is being discussed right now, a labor market reform, and a social security reform. We also pointed out the importance of strengthening institutions, deepening competition, and increasing public investment in infrastructure projects, among others. Thank you very much, Samir.
Thank you. Thank you, Luis. Let me invite Steve Morrison, Senior Vice President and Director of Global Health Policy Center at the CSIS US, for his 2 minutes intervention.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you, Jim, for this opportunity. CSIS formed a commission on strengthening America's health security back in spring of 2018, and the central focus was what we identified as the recurrent cycle of crisis followed by complacency and neglect in handling pandemic threats. We populated this commission, 6 powerful and mixed bipartisan group of members of Congress, plus 15 other very diverse opinion leaders across development, diplomacy, security, industry, and the like. We issued a major report in November of 19, about 6 weeks prior to the advent of the coronavirus arrival, and put in that 7 concrete steps for the U.S. government to pursue, and those had to do with restoring White House leadership, several financial measures on long-term financing and quick release financing.
Steve, you are muted. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Steve, you're still muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I apologize. I apologize for that. So we came forward with a major report just prior to the coronavirus with concrete recommendations, actionable ones, around restoring White House leadership, financing, focusing on equities, focusing on research and development of vaccines and therapies, and focusing on a weaponized and polluted digital world. Then SARS coronavirus 2 struck, and what we found was the uptake in Congress and within the Biden team became a top priority, and we were quite successful, I'm proud to say, in seeing in the 200-page report released last week on the action plan by Biden, all of these recommendations visibly embedded in that. What are the conclusions? Luck matters. In other words, we picked a big problem early on, claimed it was national security embedded, and pushed it hard. Concrete recommendations, bipartisanship, and building a platform in the form of this commission. One last set of very rapid remarks. What we've heard this morning, I agree. The agenda looking forward is dealing with the gross inequities around vaccine nationalism and what we're seeing as the gap that will emerge. dealing with the void in high-level diplomacy, which is shocking, and figuring out how to fix that, and working on the U.S.-China strategic competition. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Richard Ponzio, Senior Fellow and Program Director, the Stinson Center, U.S.
Thank you, Samir and Jim. My colleagues and I timed the launch of this year's Doha Forum report entitled Coping with New and Old Crises, Global and Regional Cooperation in an Age of Epidemic Uncertainty to coincide with last month's United Nations COVID Response Summit. Our top line takeaway was that the international response to the pandemic has often proved fragmented, delayed, ad hoc, and under-resourced, while pointing to promising new global public-private partnerships to spur innovation through new technologies and to promote decent job and wealth creation opportunities. With the arrival of multiple effective vaccines, we recommended a 3-year global green recovery effort with 4 critical dimensions of global, regional, and national interaction. First, supporting public health, human rights, and social protections. And in this regard, we highlighted the very innovative partnership between India's Serum Institute, the Gates Foundation, and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to bring 200 million doses of a vaccine to lower and middle income countries, addressing the point my colleague just mentioned about vaccine nationalism. Second, we stress the importance of facilitating economies that are robust, efficient, fair, and opportunity building, both for opportunities and the younger generation. Third, ensuring decarbonization and economic recovery that doubles as effective climate action, given that runaway climate change is a far greater global challenge than the current pandemic, as well as the need to learn from the failure to invest in a green recovery coming out of the 2008-9 financial crisis. And finally, we called for greater and more inclusive digital connectivity and infrastructure worldwide, and recognizing that the pandemic has made countries even more reliant on communication and e-commerce technologies, both to participate in and benefit from the new global economy. We had many consultations last year, and now we're engaging policymakers, hoping that they will adopt a more coordinated, comprehensive, and environmentally sensitive approach to COVID recovery worldwide. Particular focus on the G20 and UN system.
Thanks, Richard. Let me turn to Mihir Sharma, Head of Economy and Growth Program at the Observer Research Foundation.
Thank you, Samir. ORF, the Observer Research Foundation in Delhi, has an enormous portfolio of activities, and we devoted most of our bandwidth over the past year across various programs to addressing the fallouts of the COVID pandemic. These included working out through the Security and Strategy divisions what the post-pandemic world order would look like. Our tech division looked at pandemic-related disinformation. We ran a case and test counter and so on. What I'm here to focus on, however, very briefly, is what we did in order when it became clear that India's own case count was coming under control and questions of dealing with the economic recovery began to monopolize the government's mind. Remember, India was harder hit than any other G20 nation by the economic side of the pandemic. We had an unprecedented recession. And what ORF determined was that the government would not have the resources, forget about funding a recovery, but if it managed to fund a recovery, that recovery would certainly not embed any forward-looking and particularly green elements in it. How to build back better, how to create a green recovery, we determined that we needed new institutions. India needed new institutions that would be able to channel the flow of funds from outside India's borders into appropriate green economy-related regeneration, rejuvenation projects. I think we can report that this received a very favorable hearing with the government. It's likely that something will be announced on this in this domain very shortly. Finally, I would like to say that as with everything else that ORF does, we try and ensure that it isn't an India-specific solution. What we try to build is something that not only looks beyond India's borders, but has broad applicability across the emerging world, and that's because as pretty much the only think tank with our capacity and from emerging world perspective that looks at these problems, we have to do it. Thank you, Samir.
Let me move to Abid Suleri, Executive Director, SDPI Pakistan.
Thank you.
Along with the COVID and economic recession, the world was also warned about food crisis. Now in Pakistan, there are three challenges when it comes to data on food stocks, supplies, requirements, and prices of different food commodities. Number one, data is not collected. Number two, data is available in scattered form at different administrative level, but not collated. And number three, data on production exists, but there is no tracking or tracing of food supply chain. Now, these challenges, they result in food inflation, food hoarding, and too little response time for policymakers. STPI strengthened use of evidence for food security policy responses. We identified different indicators and sources through which food data can be collected and triangulated. We developed a food security dashboard, which would reflect the real-time situation of stocks, demand, and price variation of 32 essential food commodities. For each commodity, the analogy of traffic light is used. Green means district has surplus supplies of a particular food commodity. Amber means supplies are less than 15 days demand, necessitating an administrative action. And red means deficit. The dashboard has also analytical and forecasting features. Prime Minister of Pakistan has approved the use of dashboard, and STPI is enhancing capacities of civil servants at federal and provincial level on collection of data and using the dashboard. So while online is the new norm of living our lives, STPI has turned it into an opportunity for an online collation and interpretation of data for decision makers and for helping the government to ensure food security through use of digital technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit. Can I request Katie Tubb, Senior Policy Analyst, the Heritage Foundation?
Hi, and thank you very much for having me. The Heritage Foundation is located in Washington, D.C., and it formulates policy research based on conservative principles and values. In April 2020, the foundation assembled 17 top experts in public health, disaster response, business, government, education, and the faith community to form the National Coronavirus Recovery Commission. The commission sought to provide timely, coordinated, and cohesive solutions for policymakers at every level of government, as well as the private sector, to help navigate the nation through the pandemic toward recovery. Oftentimes, these groups think in terms of their own silos. Consequently, the Commission had a major impact in both framing the problem for policymakers, that is, the need to address both lives and livelihoods, as well as impact in establishing the context for reforms, that is, leveraging federal, state, local, and private institutions in ways they were uniquely and best suited to. Importantly, the Commission was able to adapt its work quickly to the evolving environment and issued recommendations on a rolling basis. It received over 750 comments from the public, forged connections with 40,000 policymakers, worked with state-level think tanks who were engaged with their own governors and legislatures, and ultimately offered 265 recommendations to safely reopen America. It also published interactive county-level data and maps and graded the effectiveness of state pandemic responses. The White House especially picked up on the Commission's recommendations and sought its counsel. The report received attention from the highest levels, including then Secretary of Labor Eugene Scalia, who keynoted the final Commission report release. Given the expertise and flexibility of the Commission as well as the Foundation, they were able to uniquely engage with the private sector and governments at every level to deal with the multifaceted issues at hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. Let me now turn to Annetta Wayne, Vice President, Lithuanian Free Market Institute.
Right after the Lithuanian government sanctioned the first urgent lockdown in mid-March, the Lithuanian Free Market Institute called on the cabinet to allow immediate business tax deferrals and to suspend automatic freezing of bank accounts for tax non-compliance. By law, business taxes were due in mid-month, literally within a few days, and companies were already facing serious disruptions in supplies and productions and sales. So the cabinet immediately endorsed our proposals, and a total of 21,000 companies had benefited from tax deferrals by June 2020, helping to prevent wide-scale business closures and job losses. And the same policies now apply during the second lockdown. And while the first cabinet responses were sound and timely, paradoxically, the parliament proceeded with their public spending and regulatory plans as per normal. So our team, submitted a memorandum to the parliament, the president, and the cabinet, and we called for replacing this legislative inertia with an anti-crisis strategy and horizontal and swift economic policy responses. And we highlighted 20 plus public spending and regulatory proposals that would impose untimely and unjustified burdens on the pandemic-stricken nation. And as a result, the Parliament revised its agenda and withheld most of the draft laws, such as tax hikes on the self-employed, increases in social security contributions, and new regulations on working hours. And also back in March, the government proposed price regulations and restrictions on the sale and supply of goods. And in the position note, we oppose such policies, and they were rejected by the Parliament, preventing shortages and price increases that would have hurt the whole nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Can I now request Louise Foncheek, Head of Unit EU and Global Affairs, Klingendahl Institute, Netherlands.
Yes, thank you for giving Klingendahl the opportunity to present our work on the EU's positioning in the World Health Organization, WHO. It's one of the examples of our COVID-related activities of 2020. The EU in that year was put on the spot because of the pandemic and the diverging views of the US and China on the WHO handling of the outbreak. How would the traditional defender of multilateralism, the EU, position itself towards the WHO? Previous research from Klingendahl had found the EU not to be strongly engaged with the WHO and global health matters. But COVID-19 proved, needless to say, a wake-up call, with the Commission President von der Leyen organizing a pledging conference to catalyze a global response in vaccines development in close cooperation with the WHO. The EU and its member states also strongly defended the WHO in face of criticism and withdrawal by the Trump administration. Together with the Berlin-based think tank SWP, Klingendahl organized a closed virtual roundtable with about 50 officials and experts from WHO, EU institutions, EU member states, and other stakeholders. Our meeting was organized 1 week after the EU had secured a resolution on the WHO response to the COVID outbreak in the World Health Assembly. In the roundtable, we talked openly about sensitive issues such as the reform of the WHO and its international health regulations that govern the pandemic response. In October, we published our SWP comment in which we recommended a far more outspoken EU positioning in the WHO. In November, EU ministers under the German presidency adopted Council conclusions on the role of the EU in strengthening WHO. And we also secured some academic uploading of our work by means of an article in a special issue of Journal of European Integration, so that our efforts, but also our thinking on this issue was shared with the wider community, also of academics. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Can I request Stephen Wong, Senior Vice President and Executive Director of Public Policy Institute, our Hong Kong Foundation from Hong Kong, to make his remarks. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit hard Hong Kong's economy. With the 2020 GDP,
I can't hear you, Stephen. You'll have to. I can't hear you. You have to bring the mic closer to you. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
No, can't.
Can you hear me?
Okay, what I'll do is I'll come back to you. Let me go to Yuri Yakimenko first, and let's try and get you after that. You can just test your mic for 2 minutes. You just try to get it right. So Yuri Yakimenko, President, Razumkov Center, Ukraine. Can you come in for your 2 minutes?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, greetings, dear colleagues. I'm glad with this possibility to share our experience with colleagues from all over the world. From the very beginning of COVID-19 pandemic in Ukraine, the Razumkov Center has started to work on anti-crisis policy recommendations for government and became one of the founders of the Center of Economic Recovery of Ukraine. The center has been founded in spring 2020 as a result of a joint initiative of Ukrainian government, think tanks, businesses, and trade unions. It has been designed as a platform for discussion and elaboration of anti-crisis policy recommendations in different spheres. Currently, there are 21 think tanks, 34 business associations and trade unions, 37 business structures, and 40 governmental agencies among members of the Center of Economic Recovery. Within 2 months, the CER managed to carry out extensive research aimed at the improvement of the difficult social and economic situation in Ukraine. The particular close cooperation of the leading think tanks, businesses, trade unions, government, and international partners enabled to launch the state program to boost economy under conditions of restrictive measures for preventing the spread of COVID-19 disease for 2020-2022. The program has been approved by the Ukrainian government in May, and more than 60% of its proposals among 120 were developed by the CER, and this indicates their value. Currently, at the government's request, the Center for Economic Recovery of Ukraine is working on the development of its national economic strategy for 2030. Also, in the end of 2020, the Razumkov Center presented its research ensuring human rights and freedoms amid the spread of coronavirus infection, peculiarities and ways of improvement, based on the results of the national survey. And now we are continuing our studies aimed to prevent the outcomes of COVID pandemic in Ukraine and for internationally as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And let's go back to Stephen. Stephen, let's make another attempt.
Hello, yeah, can you hear me now?
Go ahead. We'll try to hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, good. So the COVID-19 pandemic has hit hard Hong Kong's economy, with 2020's GDP expected to have contracted by at least 6% or worse since 1998's Asian financial crisis. Our Hong Kong Foundation will develop an effective response to help boost the local economy by government infrastructure investment, as not only act as a short-term counter-cyclical fiscal policy that creates jobs, but also brings long-term benefits to the city. Our Hong Kong Foundation's research demonstrated that transport infrastructure like roads.
Stephen, we can't hear you, unfortunately. I think we will have to, unfortunately, bring you in another time. And Jim, I know I'm running out of time. I can't hold you off from the next segment. I'm going to turn it back to you. Let me thank all the think tank leaders and contributors for their contribution in 2020. Difficult times, we stayed together, and James McGann deserves a special mention for keeping this community alive. James, over to you. You're muted, James. Jim, you're muted. Yeah, Jim, you're muted, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was not unlocking. Today, and this session in particular, clearly and demonstrably demonstrates the contribution that think tanks have made in 2020 to save lives and livelihoods. And it is important that we continue to demonstrate the contributions we make to the communities and people around the world. And as the ambassador said, we need to reach and connect with the citizens of our countries so that they know the value of evidence, experts, and in our context, think tanks. I now turn it over to the next panel, which is a distinguished panel of think tank executives to help share with us what we need to do, how we can become smarter, better, faster, and more informed. Thank you very much. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jim. Can you hear me? So, good afternoon. I'm Monica Maggioni. I'm a senior correspondent and former president of Rai, Italian television, and I'm really honored to chair this all-women panel. You know, what it happens normally, that I ask myself if they call me because I'm good in chairing panels or just because they need a gender balance, most of the time. So I really thank Jim and this community of think tanks that are showing the way. I'm thrilled to share with you now comments and reflections about this idea of how the think tanks can serve as catalysts for ideas and actions. So 6 outstanding executives of leading think tanks will help us out in this demonstration. So first of all, let me introduce our first panelists, which will be Camilla Bauscher. Camilla, good morning, no, good afternoon, because you're in Europe with me, and you're the director of Ecologic Institute. So the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Camilla.
Thank you, Monica. Very honored to be here today with this distinguished panel at this wonderful event. And thank you, Jim, for pulling this all together. Now, the question is, how can we be better, smarter? What do we need to do to stay relevant? First of all, of course, that is a broad range of very different animals. We have a multitude of types. We're small, big, poor, rich, new and well-established, all around the world, focusing on different topics. Acknowledging all of that, I tried to identify four issues which kind of affect all of us and where we really have to pay attention. First of all is our mission. So the mission is a good future, of course, but what future do we talk about? Are we talking about stability and improvement of the status quo, talking about the immediate future? I want to suggest we all have to think about the long-term future, because the impacts of today will be felt by our nephews, by our kids, by our nieces, by those who we love and who are still walking a meter height. So we really have to think a better future for the next generation. I think that's an important thing for all of us. Second, what are the topics we have to address no matter which topic we focus on? I again think there are a number of topics we all have to be aware of and have to address, including the planetary boundaries. If we don't pay attention to the planetary boundaries, the boundaries will teach us their power. So we better pay attention, because it actually affects everything we do now and in the future, including the climate topic, which has come up already before. Second, the Sustainable Development Goals and the agenda, which has been agreed by the United Nations. When the world comes together, that was in 2015, agreeing on something, what they believe a good future to be, we better pay attention when we work in our think tanks. Thirdly, it has been kind of mentioned, and this is now a dimension, it's the social dimension of crisis and change. Both crisis and change, because obviously we work towards change. And we heard how the corona crisis actually highlights the importance of dealing with this question, to also alleviate not only the moral issues around it, but also the tension it brings to societies and the world. Secondly, it has been mentioned by many, Ashish, Jacob, Melissa, just to name a few, resilience. It has to be a guiding principle when we think about what we work on. And last but not least, I think we as think tanks have actually to buy into multilateralism, thinking about the big crisis of today. I think it's too simple to retreat into nationalism, and Ashish has said it and Kevin has elaborated it, so I will skip details. It has been talked about. For 2021 and 2022, of course, there is one issue we can't ignore no matter what we do. These are the recovery packages with the unprecedented monies which are released. Now, my time is running out, so I will skip a few points I wanted to make, but I want to say, review the way of engagement and your theories of change, because think tanks have not yet delivered pathways to the future we want to see. They have delivered a lot of knowledge, but if you see where our society stands, we have not delivered the impact we want to see. So go and look at your theories of change. Are they still convincing? And let's use the strength of our think tanks model. And I think there are some structural strength. We have time to think. Somebody said policymakers. I think it was Mr.
Time is running out. Your money.
Yes. Yes. Time is money, and I will be done hopefully in 1 minute. Time to think. Let's take the time to think. We were advised to do so, and I think it's fun to do so, and it's necessary to do so. Some others don't have time. Let's do that. We're not bound to election cycles. We can overcome the sectoral divide better than others, and we can work across borders, like Paolo has mentioned with the Solidarity campaign as one example, better than others. And we have more freedom, And
Yes,
I will
Camilla.
finish now because my time is up, even though I want to talk more. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for my time.
For now, maybe later. I hope so, at least, because it was super interesting listening to you, and because you also focus our attention on the long-term policy shaping, which is exactly what normally policymakers tend to avoid. They're so much concentrated on short term, and this is one of the roles think tanks can have, for sure. Medellina Editor, now the floor is yours. 4 to 5 minutes, or your money is running out. This is a problem.
Thank you, Monica. Also, thanks, Jim, for putting us together. I think we are all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic has tremendously changed the landscape of policy-oriented research and advocacy within a short time. Reflecting on what has happened during the past year here at CSIS Indonesia, I believe there are two lessons worth mentioning from the organizational and managerial perspective. First is about finding ways to stay relevant amid the changing priorities. COVID-19 has swiftly elevated issues such as public health, digitalization, health economy, and social welfare to the spotlight. However, we cannot turn into public health and epidemiology think tank overnight. Our respective institutions may have gathered knowledge capital on different set of issues altogether throughout our organization's lifetime. Even with diverse enough team, any organization might find difficulties adapting with a very sudden change of topics and problems. Recruiting new experts with relevant background might not be an easy task due to the increasing demand and financial challenges faced by think tanks in the pandemic. And yet, COVID-19 might have presented complex challenges, but it has yielded multifaceted opportunities. Every discipline can provide meaningful contribution by examining how the pandemic has affected their sector or area of expertise. This is evident at my organization, where we have attained possibilities to explore COVID-19 impact through the lens of international relations, domestic politics, social change, economics, and disaster management. We do not always have homegrown expertise, but a collaboration and fellowship with individual scholars and institutions made it possible. It is a universal notion that to handle this pandemic, collaboration between stakeholders is essential. Therefore, it's only sensible for think tank and research institutions to build alliances to bridge the expertise gap and deficiency. Second, notwithstanding the new opportunities that digital technology presented, we need to admit that effective policy engagement still requires direct human interaction. Policy changes might gain momentum from robust and rigorous policy recommendation, but it needs to be supported by commitment and trust building, personal communication, and intensive interaction with the policymakers. Our experience showed that digital advocacy is still less effective, especially when dealing with the new policymakers who just got into a new position and we did not personally know before. For particular policies and circumstances, lobby, personal meeting, and other informal arrangements remain the key to advocacy success. Trust building and mutual understanding will not be enough if it's only being done through the computer screen. The lesson learned is that policy advocacy should not target the policymakers alone, but also communities. Think tank needs to engage with and provide a platform for the advocated communities to speak for themselves. Engaging with public through digital means has become more efficient now. given that the traditional boundaries of time and place have disappeared. For that purpose, social media is an effective means of influencing public discourse and sustaining the momentum among the different groups in society towards a specific policy goal. In a functioning democracy, I believe that garnering societal support on a cause is essential to ensure a well-targeted policy change. Eventually, I think the key is to distinguish which part of a think tank's activities can be migrated to the digital space and which ones still demand direct engagement, and whether the digital alternative to that can still be reasonably employed. Finally, in adapting with the changing society, there is no one-size-fits-all strategy. It depends on our individual country's socio-political and context and internal governance. Nevertheless, I believe that whether there is a global pandemic or not, we will always chase a moving target. Actors, governance, and priorities change all the time. I'm really agile and flexible of our constant pursuit of impact and relevance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and sorry for interrupting you, but it's so important to have the chance to interact on these topics because they are key topics, and what you are just pointing out, this difficult balance between human aspects of being relevant and innovation, technological innovation, social media is so important. So thank you very much, and let me also remind that you're the Deputy Executive Director of the Center of Strategic Studies of Indonesia. Thank you so much, Medellina. Now let's move to morning, if I'm right, to the other part of the globe, to Julia Diaz, who's the Executive Director of Centro de Erosion International. So, Julia, now the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's great to be here. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Jim. I'd like to greet my colleagues in this panel and also congratulate Jim Magan and his team for the latest edition of the ranking. So we are so excited to see the result in a few minutes. My name is Julia Diaz, and for the last 5 years, I've been the Executive Director of the Brazilian Center for International Relations, SEBRE. And last year, I was appointed the first woman CEO at SEBRE, during managing the crisis of COVID-19 pandemic. I'm very honored to be a woman leader in the Brazilian major think tank and also to be here today on an all-woman panel. The work at SEBRE has changed and has changed a lot. The crisis was also an opportunity to influence society at large and to inform the public and what think tanks are and what they do. For SEBRE, which were a closed-door think tank, we became much more, reach more people, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit now. We'll emphasize 3 main aspects we believe think tanks all over the world must take into account when looking to their future. First is the role of the online in expanding the impact managed messages think tanks are communicating. Second, the importance of building partnerships with other think tanks and civil society institutions to deal with shared challenges. And third, the importance of focus on long-term and high-impact projects that bring positive benefits to society. Regarding the first aspect, the beginning of 2020, SEBRE launched a platform called SEBRE Online, and we had more than 150 events engaging high-level representatives from different sectors and different countries. We're reaching an audience we never had before of more than 150,000 people. This experience helped us to consolidate a transition in our approach from a closed-door think tank to a more open space. We plan to continue using the online events to be more effective in connecting more people and bringing quality information to the Brazilian society and influence the public opinion. Next week, for example, we will host a debate of the importance of strengthening Brazilian supranational diplomacy and raising efforts for states and cities in the global race for the vaccine. Regarding the second aspect, last year we strengthened our partnership with other think tanks and international institutions to discuss relevant topics on the crisis. One of those partnerships was with Konrad Adenauer Foundation. The project called Reorienting Multilateralism discussed the way the world faced COVID-19 crisis globally and what the directions and possible bases upon which to change multilateral politics. The project reached an audience for more than 30 different countries and launched 11 publications. Finally, on the third aspect, we believe that think tanks must prioritize projects with long-lasting impact on society. In partnership with IDB and the Brazilian government and the private sector, we are launching a fund dedicated to finance policy-oriented research and debate on the future of energy transition. The initiative will provide ideas and directions for companies and institutions how to deal with the energy transition challenges during and after the crisis. All of these examples make us to believe that SEBRE and think tanks all around the world are able to continue to meet their mission as relevant institutions to society, especially in difficult times. Thank you very much. It was great to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Julia. And let me also underline the fact that you said that you went digital to your public because there was COVID. And so one of the aspects is being relevant means also being seen at any times, even in difficult and dark times like in COVID. So you moved where your public in some ways. Now let's all move together to Kenya, to Linda Musumba. Linda is the chairperson of the board of the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. And so now, Linda, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and greetings to all participants in this forum. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to make remarks on behalf of KIPRA, which stands for the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. KIPRA is the official government think tank. I know that many think tanks within this forum are not aligned to government or, attached to government institutions, but KIPRA is, and in our space we've been able to do quite a lot because we have inroads into government. So today I wish to make 3 points. First of all, that is information is power. How do we remain relevant, agile, and flexible? At KIPRA, one of the things that we've been able to do is to hold conferences on thematic areas during this COVID period, highlighting the research that we've been able to do on various issues that have an economic aspect, that have an aspect on inclusivity, have an aspect on the consequences and effects on different persons within our society, and then being able to disseminate this information to the respective persons. And during such forums, we have both we have persons from the government and the non-state arena, so at least we are able to communicate these messages to people. So without that information, it is actually impossible for decision makers, both in the state and non-state arena, to be able to make cogent decisions. So we believe that information placed before the right people, right audiences, is extremely important in enabling us to remain relevant. The second point I'd like to make is looking at COVID-19, looking at the COVID-19 pandemic through the lenses of think tanks. Like the parable is told of the 6 visually impaired people at the Jain temple who touched the elephant. And everybody, depending on what part of the elephant they touched, gave their comment about what they thought the elephant was. This is very much the same as the COVID-19 pandemic, where you have a situation that where there are those who will tell you that COVID-19 is was artificially created in the lab. There are those who will tell you that COVID-19 is a more virulent strain of the flu. There are those who will tell you that COVID-19 is a punishment from God. There are others who will say it's as a result of witchcraft, and there are those people will say different things. So what's our duty as think tanks during this COVID-19 pandemic? And I think it's important for us as think tanks to be able to underline the consequences of the pandemic, regardless of what someone's thoughts are or perceptions are about where it came from. It has had consequences. As business, commerce, and industry change and change the way they do things, as markets close and others open, it's our duty to highlight the consequences of these changes on the disaggregated public. Those changes or those consequences will, hit differently for women, for children, for persons in the South, for persons in the West, for people in different places. So I think that it's our duty to be able to highlight the consequences of the pandemic squarely in the way that they actually impact different people. So for that reason, I think that as think tanks, we need to develop that groundwell of study and research that we are able to guide governments and people in the non-state arena. The non-state arena here, for example, I have in mind the multinational companies, of course, many of which are in Africa, doing quite a lot of work. So they also need to be in this conversation, and that's why I keep on emphasizing on players in the state and the non-state arena. My last point has to do with how think tanks progress from this point. Now, there are many think tanks that are lone and insular, and I'd have to say, for example, within Kipra, I was asking myself, to what extent do we have strong ties with other think tanks in East Africa? What about other think tanks in Africa? What about other think tanks everywhere? So for that reason, I think it's very important that we build those connections, because it is very clear that how COVID hits another country has got direct consequences for other parts of the world. So for example, when flight bans are announced in one part of the world, it has significant consequences for countries in other places. So for this reason, insular research or lone think tanks will not survive. So for this reason at Kipra, we feel that it's important that we close ranks as think tanks, both at a national level, at a regional level and international level, because the messages that we sometimes produce at the national level we need think tanks at the regional and international level to amplify those messages. So for example, when we have high-level messengers from the global arena also speaking to leaders in the global south, in the different parts of the world about the messages that we're talking, it amplifies our message. And I think I've probably exhausted my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. And basically, what you were raising right now connects to what Camilla was saying at the beginning with this idea of the planetary boundaries, that in a way or another, this connection is going to help even the kind of impact you can have. So now, in a time in which traveling is so complicated, thanks to technology, we travel back to the States and we move to Sarah Rosenwortel. Sarah is the president of Urban Institute in the United States. Sarah, the floor is yours for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Monica. And it's a real honor to be in this amazing group of women leaders from around the country. I really am pleased to be here. So the charge from Jim was to talk about how think tanks can be smarter, better, faster, more agile, innovative, and tech savvy in the midst of multiple global crises. And that's a tall order, but I'm going to try to give a few thoughts I have about how we as leaders of institutions can try to do that. And I will say that obviously these last year has been the ultimate test of how to be smarter, better, faster in the midst of, constrained resources and great operational and health crises. Obviously, we all need to pivot. We need to anticipate the needs of decision makers in this crisis and to bring our expertise to bear, because if we can, I don't disagree with Camilla about the importance of keeping the long view in our mind, but part of the way you make progress towards your long-term goals is to take advantage of the crisis to show people how we can move forward. And we are having to bring our expertise to bear in ways that are useful and relevant that we hadn't even imagined, when the crisis began. And I want to add one more challenge for us to think about. This is obviously a central issue in the United States, but I think actually broadly relevant around the globe. The way that COVID has hit, coupled with, at least in America, the really profound reckoning around race and our sad, sorry history racism built into the structures and systems in our society, have shown us that we need to make closing those gaps central. And I would argue that social inclusion across difference is a key issue in different ways, of course, in many countries. And so, Jim, I'm going to actually make a humble suggestion to you. You have helped to lead the think tank sector by challenging us. And part of the way you do that is what we measure is what counts. And you've added new criteria about the ways that think tanks have been strengthening their work, including about how they're addressing AI and using technology and developing effective advocacy campaigns. So I'd suggest you think about a category of the best think tanks on equity and social and inclusion, whether that would be US or more globally, because I think that encouraging institutions to put equity at the heart of the decisions they make is one of the things this last period has shown all of us. And I'll just note, President Biden issued an executive order this week that on his first day in office, actually last week, that said that he's directing agencies. Equity is not a side issue. It is embedded in our climate discussions, in our housing discussions, and so many other things. And I would think our think tank community could begin to think about that too. In individual institutions, I think this is not just about the diversity of staff, but the climate and culture and content of the work and how much all diverse staff have an opportunity to be part of shaping the conversation about what matters. My institution has a proud record of documenting racial disparities, diagnosing them, but we need to do more to unpack how we can tackle systems and structures to advance racial equity and to find solutions, and not just to describe the sad differences in the prospects for different parts of our population. And that means bringing an equity lens to the entire research project, what we designed to go for, to pursue, who's at the table when we decide what's a priority, who's at the table when we try to figure out the best collection methods or how to interpret data, and who do you think of as your audience? Are you disseminating only to elite policymakers, or do you see this as part of empowering actors in your system and in your society so that they can have a voice in the conversation? To do that requires different ways of communication. Thank you. So I just think that centering equity for a think tank system around the globe is a really critical, important, just as it is for us to be nimble. And I'll just close by saying that I think this period has really tested our nimbleness, particularly those of us who are very research heavy with a lot of data and analysis. We don't always turn that around super quickly, but we are really trying to put in place microsimulation modeling tools that you can then quickly put a new policy proposal through, or tools and trackers that bring information that is timely, localized, and the best information you have, maybe amassing sources from private sector and others to decision makers at the neighborhood level. So never let a crisis go to waste. What we can learn from this moment is about how to be timely, but also how to center equity in our work. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Thanks so much, Sarah, because really I think it's, you just point out the real lesson of what that COVID is teaching all of us, all over the globe. And this idea of the new category is quite interesting. I will turn that to Jim at the end of our panel. But thank you so much. And let's move to Egypt, because now the floor is for Dalia Ziada, Director of Liberal Democracy Institute in Egypt. Dalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Dr. McCain, and thank you, Monica, especially for pronouncing my last name correctly. Let me start. Yeah. So let me start by, actually my presentation won't be far from what my colleagues on this panel has already mentioned, but I'm putting it as I'm calling it the sweet spot challenge that think tanks should be meeting to be faster, to be more agile, more even keeping in pace with what's going on. So first of all, we all agree that think tanks are vehicles of knowledge. We are responsible for turning random information and quantitative data into a comprehensible formats that decision makers in both public and private sectors can make use of to make people's lives better. So for think tanks to remain important and relevant in today's fast and complicated world, they need to meet the sweet spot challenge. The sweet spot challenge is about keeping the perfect balance on 5 main issues. Number 1, keeping the sweet spot between academia and journalism or mass media. Think tanks are not media institutions responsible for announcing or disseminating information to the public. At the same time, they are not academic institutions that are dedicated to do specialized research that only specialized academicians would be interested in, regardless of their relevance to daily events. Rather, think tanks should be invested in keeping pace with current affairs that's happening where they operate, their local environment, so they can intervene with quick response enhanced by knowledge and data that helps decision makers and public citizens understand what is happening and how to deal with it. Number 2 is to keep the sweet spot between a specialized audience or targeting a specialized audience and targeting general audience. Think tanks are not only working for or with policymakers or the political elite in a certain country or region. They should also engage with the public, ordinary citizens. They can use public citizens as resources of information, and also they should make sure that they produce materials that can educate this general public and educate the public opinion about the current affairs and why decision makers had to make certain decisions at certain times. This makes citizens more active and make think tanks act as maybe the perfect channel of communication between citizens and government, which will eventually lead also to a better world. Number 3 is to keep the sweet spot between being friendly with decision makers and being critical of the decisions they make. That is the issue. I'm saying this especially that, I'm coming from the Middle East, and sometimes when you are working with decision makers, they always expect that you be on their own side. And when you criticize them, they look at you as if you are, the enemy, or you should not, they wouldn't take you positively or deal with you positively as long as you criticize them. So we need to make sure to remain neutral, non-biased, in a time that remaining neutral and non-biased has become really a struggle and very difficult. Number 4 is to keep the sweet spot between what is local, what is regional, and what is international. And I'm glad that actually one of my colleagues here has already mentioned this. I think the pandemic has shown us that what is local is very, very related to what is regional and very, very related to what is international. The troubles facing our world today are mostly global issues. They affect all humankind. Okay, regardless of their region or country. So this is very important to find a way to link all of us together, which leads me to the final point, which is point 5, about keeping the sweet spot between using social media and being consumed by social media. Most think tanks, old and new, have very good presence on social media platforms, especially on Twitter and YouTube, but their presence does not mean they are actually making the best use of those platforms. And actually the think tankers working in think tankers, I mean the researchers and the staff working at think tanks, usually are more consumed by social media more than they use social media to promote their proposed ideas and research work. Sometimes they even get affected by the misinformation that's spread there on social media and use them in their research, which makes the work of their think tank weaker or less credible. So we very much need to find maybe our own social hub for think tanks to do something similar to what Dr. McGinn and his team are trying to do for a while, is to bring us from all over the world in one place together, but to do this on a constant basis, maybe build a social media specialized for think tanks or only think tankers can use. This is an ambitious project that me and my colleagues at the Liberal Democracy Institute have been trying to do for a while. It's very difficult and we still cannot figure it out, but I'm sure it's not impossible. So this was my point. Thank you.
What I would suggest to our outstanding panelists is the fact that we have a little bunch of minutes. I want to see James McGann nodding. If this is true, yes, we should have a little bunch of minutes more. So, 30 seconds.
Unfortunately,